I'd like to thank you all for coming. First, we're going to try to give a big picture view of what is this smart grid that people are talking about. From our staff, Dr. Pablo Bailo will talk about what is smart grid, kind of an introduction to the concept. Then Mark Michaels from Inspiria Solutions will give a national perspective. What's going on in the United States today? Where are things at? How do we fit into that? Then we'll have a break. Following that break, we'll talk about the Fort Collins program, an overview of Smart Meter Fort Collins, give you a sense of what's going on with our project. We're in the fairly early stages. This is going to be a high-level discussion, but the intent is to give you a broad perspective. And then I'd like to introduce a little bit about another project that we're working on that ties in with the concept of smart grid, and that sometimes is referred to as Fort Zed Jumpstart or the RDSI project. Then we'll conclude with Gary Schroeder talking about what does it mean to me, to try to give a sense of context. How does this work in terms of our community? I'd like to first control your expectations a little bit in terms of where we're headed, what the initial project is about. The first part of this effort is a 3-year project. The 3 years is in part defined by federal stimulus money that's using to support this project. Mark will talk a little bit about the big picture on some of the projects that are going on with that. In that context, we put together a vision statement. What does success look like in this project? And we've characterized it as a key foundation to transform our ability to support, inform, inspire, and empower the community. And for me, the key word in all this is foundation. In the short term, what you're going to see is not a lot. The most visible part of this whole project is going to be when we're replacing meters. Gary will speak to some of the longer term expectations, but the short term is really a foundation. A lot of it's below the radar, a lot of it's just getting things in place to facilitate a transition. Again, this is about a first step, and it's where the bigger picture begins. Okay, Pablo?
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all can hear me just fine. So I'm going to be talking about what is a smart grid. And as Dennis mentioned, what we are going to be doing in Fort Collins is the foundation, is the first step towards this. What I'm going to be talking is about the big picture. What is that you can do with a smart grid? I will mention on different technologies. Not all of these technologies will be deployed. I just want to cover a little bit the whole arena. That's the idea of this presentation. And before going into what is a smart grid, I thought that I could just mention a little bit about our current grid and make a parallel with the telecommunication infrastructure. So here on the left, we have a picture of Bell, and he's talking, or he's using one of his telephones. Now, if Bell were to come back from death and he were to look at these devices that we call telephone these days, he wouldn't even recognize that this is a telephone. We use these devices for many more things than just to talk. We use them to send messages, browse the web, and who knows, take pictures and all those things. So clearly, telecommunications has evolved. Now, on the other side, we have a picture of Edison. If Edison were to come back from death and walk into the control room of any utilities, within a couple of minutes, he will realize, well, you know what? This is about the same way that I left it. So I'm making a little bit of an oversimplification there, but I'm trying just to make the point. The electric infrastructure hasn't evolved as much as it could. So let me just cover a little bit what is the electric grid that we have right now, the electric grid that was designed by Edison and Tesla. There are basically 3 main components to the electric grid these days. There is the generation part of it, there is the transmission part of it, and there is the distribution. There are some power plants, there are some power cables that send power from the power plant through these cables to an urban or rural area where people use it, and then there is the substation and the distribution grid that takes energy to your homes or businesses. For Collins Utilities, we are in charge of the distribution part of it, and here in town we get the transmission and generation from Platte River Power Authority. Now this grid, the traditional grid, is a grid that works in a one-way fashion. Power is generated, is transmitted, distributed, and used. Power, information, everything moves from left to right in this grid. That is something that is changing with the smart grid. Now, before really going into a smart grid, I just want to do a thought experiment with you all. Let's try to imagine what will be the impact of a 10 or 15 minutes power outage through time, through decades. So in the 60s, if we would have had a 10-minute power outage, probably the most relevant thing that we will notice is that an electric clock will be some minutes late. In the 70s, we will have an electronic clock, and the clock will be blinking 12 over and over and over again. Let's keep moving on time. Let's go to the 80s and the 90s. Now computers are everywhere. We work with them all the time. We have a power outage, we lose work. Now, at this point is when things really start to get serious. As I say, we lose work, we lose money. We really become used, and we really rely on energy and power to be there. If we move one decade, to the last decade, with the advent of the e-commerce and with the stock market talking and interacting all the time with each other, it really becomes even a multi-million-dollar loss if there were to be a power outage. You might remember the blackout of 2003 in the Northeast. That blackout is estimated to have been a $6 billion loss. So really, power is a big part of our economy. So as a way to enhance reliability, enter the smart grid. So a smart grid really is just a communication layer that will run in parallel with the electric grid. That communication layer will enable flexibility, automation, and control of the grid. Thanks to that, we are going to be able to run the grid in a much more efficient way than we are doing now. Different analyses and pilots are showing that savings of on the order of about 10% could be reached. Some pilots show more, some others a little bit less, but to call it about 10% is a realistic estimate. The carbon impact of being able to reduce the nationwide energy use by 10% could be equivalent to remove about 50 million cars from the roads, or to plant trees in an area equivalent to Texas. I like to make a lot of comparisons, and I will do a few during my presentation. So let me make the first one now. If someone were to ask you, what is the internet? You might be a little bit challenged. Some people might say, well, the internet is Google, the internet is email, Facebook, or something. Well, a smart grid is something. As the internet, that is just a system of layers and applications and services that run between computers thanks to a communication layer, a smart grid is going to be a series of applications and services that will run on layers in parallel with the electric grid. Now, this new way of doing things is really marking a paradigm shift for the utilities, and it's going to turn into new benefits for the customers. Currently, what we have is a system in which there is central power generation, is a system in which there is very limited real-time data, and in which customers get one monthly reading, your bill. Smart grid technologies is going to allow distributed generation, real-time data, and at much more detail on your electric bill or your utility bill. As I was saying before, in comparison, if you get the bill from your cell phone, typically you can get a complete breakdown on how many phone calls you have made, how long each one of them was, to which number. On your utility bill, typically you get two numbers, how many kilowatt hours and how much you have to pay. That is part of the detailed billing and usage information that the smart grid is going to allow. And all these technologies is going to give new benefits to the customers. It's going to be more reliable. There is going to be a way to be more efficient on the way that the grid is run. And probably for the customers, the most important thing is that they're going to be able to engage on the way that the grid is run. It's going to allow customer participation. So let's just have a little bit of a plot, and let me sort of like walk you through a little bit of the vision of what a smart grid could be. There is going to be a utility with a control center room that's going to be the same way that is now. But here on the right of the plot, we have the whole distribution system with some substations and switches and a lot of hardware all this system is going to be remotely operated and completely coordinated on the way that runs to run in a much more efficient way that is run these days. At the same time, there is going to be a whole network between homes and businesses that are going to be carrying information on the use of energy and maybe on price signals or different messages that might be relevant to the status and health of the grid. Now, at the core of all this technology, there are the meters. As Dennis said, the meters are the foundation, are the bottom layer in which we will be able to then build on and have other technologies to run. The main areas of a smart grid these days, one of them is the meters, or the advanced metering infrastructure, AMI. Another big area is grid automation, that is sort of like behind the scenes for the customers, that is about running the grid in a better way. Because this project and all these technologies involve a lot of data, IT and cybersecurity are two very large parts of any smart grid program. Also, outage management is part of a smart grid and is a very good customer-face part of this. Right now, if there is a power outage, in order to restore power to the customers, we need customers to call us and let us know where the problem is in town. So we are really reacting to the problem. With a smart grid system, if it were to be tied out to grid automation, there is the good chance, and some pilots actually have done, that they detect a problem before it happens. And that way they can reroute the way the power is sent to different customers. So then there won't even be a power outage. It will be like a near miss kind of thing. And finally, the other part that is really big and very active these days is demand response. Demand response is the part of the grid that really relates to the customers and to customer engagement. It's the way to get customers to do something for the grid. And as part of many different parallels I will do, I want to do one about marketing and advertisement. Historically, you will run a printed ad on a newspaper or a magazine. That is a passive way of doing marketing. Television came along on the 50s. That changed the way. That became a more active way of doing advertisement. And also you can target. If you are doing advertisement on toys, you might want to run that on the Saturday morning cartoon instead of just on page 5 of a magazine. As the time passed by, then internet came along. And then it turned into an interactive kind of way. You are clicking, you are interacting with the system, and you're getting information. Sometimes even advertisement. You all, I'm sure, have experienced that. And eventually e-commerce came along. You are looking for something, you get ads, you buy something. That is the transactive part of marketing. The grid, the electric grid, is also going from passive to transactive. This won't happen overnight. This is 5, maybe 10 years down the road. But this is, where we're going. And I'm going to mention a little bit about what I mean by the grid going transactive in the next slides. So these are some of the different technologies that a smart grid is going to be able to integrate. Now, let me emphasize this. All these technologies already exist. They might be young technologies, but they might be at an R&D or early development state. A smart grid is not developing these technologies. A smart grid is going to coordinate the use and the implementation of all of them. If anything, you can think of a smart grid as an orchestra director that just orchestrates all these different technologies. So grid automation is one of the areas I mentioned. Dennis is going to go in detail on that one, so we just mentioned grid automation behind the scenes, running the grid in a more efficient way. A smart grid is going to allow integration of renewables, and it's going to coordinate distribution generation. Renewables, we have a picture of solar panels or wind turbine. I like them. They make me feel good to know that we can have solar panels on different places around town, and that's what I mean distributed generation versus having a central power plant. Now, the main challenge of renewables is that they are not dispatchable. We cannot call them whenever we want. We don't know when it's going to be sunny, we don't know when it's going to be windy. And one of the main challenges that any electric grid is facing is the fact that energy has to be consumed basically at the same time that is generated. It's very challenging to store. There is some very limited storage, but not much. So to have renewables, what you ideally would like to do is to have some storage capabilities. Whenever it's sunny, we collect that power, we store it, and then we have it and we use it. We can dispatch this. Unfortunately, we don't have that storage capability. And as once I've heard someone say, the power industry is like being in an ice cream business without a refrigerated warehouse. It's pretty much like that, you know. Make the ice cream and eat it fast before it melts. That's basically what we're facing now with the energy grid. Now, I say that there is no much storage. There are some storage, but they are kind of limited. There are some flywheels, or here there is a very large battery bank that you can see. Just to give you a reference on the size, this is a technician, so this is pretty large. There are also other facilities like this one in Alabama. This is a very large facility in which what you have is a very large cavern, and when there is excess power, you pump air, you pressurize, you have compressed air into this cavern, and when you have a shortage of power, you let that air out and you run that through a generator. So there are some storage system. Now, these ones are still large storage. These are kind of like centralized storage. There are other options on distributed storage. Gary is going to mention in detail about the iceberg units, but basically this is an air conditioning system, a rooftop system that could be, again, through town in many different buildings. And typical AC systems, they don't run at night. During peak hours, 3 to 7 p.m., they will run at peak. And that kind of creates problems. This kind of creates like a rush hour for the utilities to deliver all that energy. These systems with ice, what they do is in the middle of the night, they run a compressor, and then they keep you cool during the afternoon by melting down the ice. As I say, Gary is going to touch more on that later. Electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are coming. In about 2 to 3 years, we're going to be seeing electric vehicles in the market for maybe $35,000 to maybe $40,000. They are going to be high-performance vehicles with a really good range. Now, Fort Collins Utilities, actually City of Fort Collins, already has some electric vehicles. They are not really high performance, but at least they are electric vehicles. They have a range of about 35 miles, and they are giving us a chance to try the technology. And also, these electric vehicles have zero emissions. They don't pollute in town. And even if you look at the pollution, at the overall pollution that an electric vehicle could create, because somewhere the energy is being generated at a plant, for instance, if you compare the pollution due to an electric vehicle at the power plant versus the pollution of any regular car, still these ones are more efficient and they pollute less. And keeping talking about the distributed generation and storage, electric vehicles are going to have batteries. And one of the options, one of the possibilities is that we're going to have all these batteries moving around town, and when they are parked and they are plugged into the grid, there could be the need for power. The utility might just be reaching a peak or something, and might be able to call for, okay, if your car is parked, we would like maybe to get some of that energy to run your home. So it's a distributed storage. You will be able to store energy on the battery of your car and then use it to run some equipment on your home. And moving into the house and the businesses, there is going to be real-time feedback. Right now, all of us get our utility bill typically 2 weeks after the end of the billing cycle. So we don't really know how much we spend until after the fact. All these devices that will be on our homes, it could be through the computer or on our telephones or something, will let us know how much power we have used, how much energy we have used, how much money we have spent to date, and it's going to help us know how much is going to be our bill halfway through the month. So we might be able to do something about it. And it moves us into what will be the smart house, or the home of the future, if you want to call it, in which there is going to be an integration of all these different meters and appliances. and they are going to be coordinated and talking to each other and working together, being managed by an energy management system. An energy management system will be able to reduce the power use of your home if there were to be the need so. For instance, if there were to be a lot of wind during one afternoon, and then the wind dies down, the utilities will have the option of sending signals to customers like, would you like to reduce your power use, or should we turn on a peaker plant? That is the kind of things when I was talking about the transactive aspect of a smart grid. There is going to be a lot of real-time or near real-time interaction between utilities and customers. All these programs are going to be completely voluntary. The customers are going to decide how is that they want to run their management systems, what kind of parameters they would like to do. It's sort of like, it's too hot, I don't want to do anything, I just want to run my AC full blast, or actually, yeah, I want to participate. So people will have the chance to override or to opt in, or most likely an energy management system will automatically do that for the customers. So kind of like to wrap up on what I'm talking about the smart grid. A smart grid is really about the customer. It's the opportunity, the first time in history in which users of the electric grid can be part of the grid and can benefit from it in new ways. We will be able to engage with the grid and be part of the grid in a way that we haven't been before. So I want to thank you for your time, and now I'm going to pass it into Mark Michaels from Inspiria Solutions.
Thank you, Pablo. So good morning, my name is Mark Michaels. I'm with Inspiria Solutions. Inspiria is a partner with City of Fort Collins Utilities, and our job here basically is to work in partnership with the city utilities organizations to help them develop and roll out and implement this new brave thing called the smart grid, if you will, within the context of the program that's been put into place by the City of Fort Collins Utilities here. And so today what I wanted to do is frame up City of Fort Collins Utilities project sort of in the context of what's going on in the national marketplace, if you will, and just bring that back and explain why that's important for us to keep an eye on what's going on in the national marketplace. Pablo did a really great job. I really appreciate his slide when we look at the evolution of electronic devices and in-home devices and understand that the needs and the requirements that we place on today's electric grid are very different than what they were years ago. And for many of us here, we can actually look at this and remember some of these older devices that are there. And as you look across the bottom and the timeline, clearly we recognize that the demands on the grid today are very much different than they were 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I believe it's a fairly safe assumption to say that the demands on the grid are going to increase. So using his analogy of looking at the grid and looking at some of the old timers coming in and looking at the state of the grid, suffice it to say that there's a need to modernize the grid, if you will, and this smart grid initiative is an opportunity to begin to take some of those steps and put that foundation into place. Growth of electronic devices, again, Pablo did a great job explaining that as well. These are drivers that are forcing us to look at our utility grid today and say, what we designed and built over the course of the last 20, 30, 40 years doesn't necessarily translate into the direction that we need to go moving forward. So the challenge that the City of Fort Collins Utilities and frankly the entire US of A has is to say, what do we need to do fundamentally different than we've been doing, and how do we stimulate that change, that modernization of the grid across the entire US? Because City of Fort Collins Utilities, while being the local provider here, is interconnected with the rest of the world. So what goes on across the grid in other parts of this state or other parts of the United States affect what we do with our energy or how it's utilized here in this City of Fort Collins. Last slide, in terms of just looking backwards and forwards here, clearly it's very evident that our use of energy in the space heating and cooling arena is evolving rapidly as well, and that's creating a number of challenges for us. Gary is going to talk a little bit more about some of those challenges coming up as well. So some of the other influences that we see here, and some of these may be quotes coming from the audience here, but customer expectations across the country, not just here within this utility, are increasing. Some of the common questions that I think we can predict here is, the obvious questions, what can I do? How can I lower my energy cost? That upper right question about what can I do to reduce my carbon footprint? You know, that's one of the social questions that's coming up here, and I think is a realistic expectation from the customer community that utilities begin to step up and address this. So to address these types of questions that are coming up, the City of Fort Collins utilities and utilities across the country have to now develop new programs, new technologies, new approaches to address these issues, because these are real questions, these are real issues that all utilities are having to deal with across the country. Social context here. I am not a Facebook user, but my kids are. And I don't know if many of you do this, but we have our cell phones on here, and there's texting and there's tweeting and all this. And very clearly, the way that we engage customers today is evolving very rapidly. When we get on the internet and we do our instant buying of our airline tickets, or we transact some sort of book or some sort of e-commerce activity, there's an expectation that's growing across all communities here that customers have a higher level of expectation of how we interact, and utilities are not immune to that. So as a utility community, we now need to look and say, okay, what is it that we need to do to interact differently with our customers? And one of the big things that's at the heart of that is the fact that we need more information, we need more knowledge than what we've had in the past. And the smart grid is intended to move us in that direction. And the City of Fort Collins Utilities Smart Grid project is intended, to use Dennis's earlier word, to help lay the foundation for allowing us to make changes in how we interact with our customers, if you will, here. Security. Who hasn't thought about security, right? We hear the stories all the time. You go on to the Amazon.com website, you place your book order. Somewhere embedded in their system is your credit card number and your security code. So information about you, about your usage, about your family and your buying habits is a real issue that's out there. Utilities likewise have information, and as we move down the smart grid path, security of that infrastructure, security of information, security of the transactions that may occur in the future is a critical component of the smart grid. And if you were to look at the various applications and you look at what the Department of Energy requires, cybersecurity and a very strict security plan is a critical component of many of the smart grid programs going forth, as it is with the City of Fort Collins. So very much a heightened sense of security, and I would say that 10 years ago, if you walked into a typical utility and say, so fellas, tell me what you're doing to secure my information or secure the transactions that occur between myself and you probably would have gotten a few blank stares. So, you know, I think this is one that I think is very clearly an area that utilities in general need to move more aggressively in, and the smart grid and the DOE grants are certainly forcing us down this path in a good and positive way. Okay, and then there's this big one here called external influences here. So all of us read the newspapers, we listen to the news, we get our we get access to the internet. We all have access to information that's going on across the country, and so those influences are things that we bring forth here to our community here too. Some of the big ones here at the federal level, for example, is if you look at the Energy Policy Act of 2005, basically, this policy act was an attempt to recognize that we've got growing energy issues in this country, and so legislation was put into place here basically to provide incentives and guarantees to improve or change the way we generate energy in this country. So things like authorizing loan guarantees for innovative technologies that avoid greenhouse gases. That was something that's been enabled by the Energy Policy Act. Pablo showed wind and solar here in EPAC 2005, basically authorized subsidies for wind and other alternative energy sources. We're now seeing that in spades across the country. I was flying yesterday from Seattle into the Denver area, and we have a large wind farm that's just begun to grow up along the Columbia River. But if you look across the country and you fly over, take a look outside, and just wind alone is one of those areas you see so much growth in, if you will, here. Another big thing that the Energy Policy Act of 2005 did is they set a series of reliability standards for our electric grid. You know, Pablo made a great point that as we're moving into the active stage, the transactive stage of the grid, commerce, businesses, we rely on that reliability. And so the Energy Policy Act and the Department of Energy basically stepped in and said, we're going to put standards and requirements into place for that. And then another key component of the Energy Policy Act is the Department of Energy came in and said, we want to understand and study demand response. How will customers interact and how will they change their behavior? What does the utility need to do to stimulate changes as we move into a more modernized grid? NARUC, however we pronounce that one. I don't know if any of you are familiar, how many of you might be familiar with that. That's the National Association of Regulatory Commissioners. So the first question is, well, you know, we're governed by the City Council, we make our own decisions, so what could we possibly want with those people? Well, those folks are out there, basically, their charter in the regulated world is to look at electricity, gas, water, and their members are charged with basically protecting the public to make sure that rates charged by regulated utilities are fair, just, and reasonable. So who do we compare ourselves here to at the City of Fort Collins Utilities? We compare ourselves to all those regulated folks. So we want to pay attention to what they're doing, you know, because they're aggressive. They want to move their rate structures. We've got to stay several steps ahead of them because that's part of who we are here at City of Fort Collins Utilities. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, their job is basically to regulate the interstate transmission of electricity. They do things like looking at relicensing of hydroelectric facilities, and they review siting of electric transmission projects. So they're out there, they're creating interactions, they're creating opportunities that the City of Fort Collins wants to pay attention as well. They license and they inspect your private hydroelectric facilities. They protect the reliability of the high voltage transmission system through mandatory reliability standards. Those standards affect us because in Pablo's slide up there, he showed that basically we are a distribution company. We rely on the reliability of the transmission, the generation folks upstream of us. So we want to pay attention to what goes on at FERC, if you will. Department of Energy, obviously we know, most of us know that one, and their job basically is to advance the national, the economic, and the energy security of the United States. Pretty important goal, and as we look at the economic impact of our grid, clearly the DOE are the folks that we need to pay attention to. A couple of big areas, energy security. They're looking at security through promotion of reliable, clean, and affordable energy. They're looking at, you know, the fact that what do we need to do to innovate in the electric and gas industry to provide breakthrough opportunities that we can ultimately implement here at this typical utility. I looked at the one slide that was the big tube that is the flywheel energy storage device here. You know, that's one that they've been active with, they've been pushing. Will it come to commercial fruition in large scales? Don't know, but we need folks like the DOE promoting those opportunities so that we can look and examine those to see if they fit potentially for us here at the City of Fort Collins Utilities here. And then our friends over at NIST. These are the folks that set the standards. And I think it's fairly self-explanatory that we need standards in this business. Big area that we're looking at is in-home devices where there are a series, and I'm looking at Gary, he just smiled here, I'm sure he's going to touch on this. But as we move into the home, what kind of standards will be adopted across the industry? How will we make sure that devices play nicely with each other and that they're easy for us to use and easy to implement? You know, if you think about, go back maybe 10 years and try to put a wireless network in your home and you're down into the bits and bytes and you're down into the deep code trying to set up configurations. Well, today, most of the time you just plug in a disk, you follow a couple quick steps and voila, it comes up, it's played. The standards are solidified. So NIST, the National Institute of Standards, has a role in what we do in the utility business and the smart grid. And there's a lot of development to work to do in that particular area as well. We've also have these things called the states down here too. States are a powerful influence on us. You look at California and you know, certainly one of the early adopters here back in the 90s where they basically said, we're going to re-regulate utilities. That old day of having generation, transmission, and distribution and controlling that entire chain, they broke that apart and they said, we want competition. And it created havoc in that sense, if you will. They deregulated that marketplace, so we can learn a lot from that, good things and not so good things. Texas has done a significant amount of opening up to what they call retail competition by deregulating customers, and their customers now have retail choice. They can select whom they buy their energy from. That option doesn't exist here today for us. Really important ones, if you look down here at Pennsylvania and Maryland, these two states are doing something very similar. Both of them have mandates that basically say, compared to a baseline of roughly either 2007 or 2008, they want to see by years 2013 or 15 a net reduction in the amount of energy that the typical consumer uses. Those net reductions can range in the area of 10 or 15%. So you're going, how are we going to do that? Because their goal is basically to bring down the resource, bring down the mix, slow down the rate of growth that's occurring within their particular utilities. So they're pushing utilities down the continuum by saying, if we put these guidelines or these bogeys that are out there, it's going to force utilities to innovate. Smart grid's a big piece of that. So if you look at Pennsylvania and you look at Maryland, most of the utilities in those two states have very aggressive smart grid programs that are pushing very, very fast along, if you will. So these are folks that we want to watch because their influences are seen through the paper, they're seen through the newspapers. We want to pay attention to what they're doing and understand what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will. And then there's this other big thing called the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARRA. So President Obama, back in February 2009, said, hey, we need to do some things here. One of the things that ARRA did, besides putting up a checking account with $787 billion in it, is they said we need to revitalize the infrastructure of this country. So if you look at the energy sector alone, the ARRA grant opportunities total somewhere in the neighborhood of $62 billion that has been made available to utilities for a variety of efforts across this country. And if you look at what some of those are, there's $11 billion in there for funding what they call the electric smart grid, if you will. There's another $6.5 billion for state and local governments to make investments in energy efficiency. There's another $4.5 billion for the Office of Electricity and Energy Reliability to modernize the grid. There's a lot of money out there. The City of Fort Collins Utility is the recipient of close to $20 million of that funding. So that's important for us because primary focus clearly is jobs, but it does provide an opportunity to modernize the grid. And the City of Fort Collins Utility is certainly going to take advantage of that opportunity. And we'll be reporting back to the Department of Energy and how we're doing. And we've got about 3 years, as Dennis and Pablo said, in order to implement the Smart Grid project, the initial foundation for that here at the City of Fort Collins Utilities. If you look across the country, this is kind of an eye chart, and the legend down here, the red ones say that says this represents ARRA-funded smart grid investment projects. The blue ones are demonstration projects in the smart grid area, and the yellow projects here are just a smattering of non-ARRA projects, if you will, here. So there's a bit of investment being made all across the country in smart grid projects that are all in various stages of design, planning, development, and implementation, if you will. This is just a very short subset here, and I'm not going to look at all of these, but in the state of Colorado here, we've got Black Hills Energy. So two folks here in the state, City of Fort Collins Utilities and Black Hills Energy, were recipients of grant money from the feds. Black Hills Energy is going to put 42,000 smart energy meters in, and they're going to work on providing a dynamic pricing pilot. Gary's going to talk a little bit about what those projects look like, if you will. Another one of note here is if you go way over there to the state of Florida, Jacksonville Electric Authority, JEA, they've got $13 million. They're going to put in a few thousand smart meters. They're going to look at dynamic pricing. They're going to look at providing software that allows customers to look at detailed energy usage. Similar themes, similar concepts to what the City of Fort Collins is looking at doing as well too. Westar Energy in Kansas has got $20 million or $19 million basically to put 48,000 smart meters in, put in a web-based customer engagement tools where they're going to try to encourage their customers, empower their customers to reduce their energy use and to limit their peak usage. So I'm not going to go into a lot more of those. I mean, SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility, these are just ones that are doing similar things to what the City of Fort Collins Utilities is looking at doing. We want to keep an eye on them. You know, these are folks that look, act, and operate in similar ways to us in their geographic areas, if you will. So we talked about foundation, and at the foundation of smart grid projects is what we call AMI. AMI is this automated metering infrastructure. This is the foundational piece, and as Dennis said, the most profound thing you'll see in the short term is that at some point that electric meter on the side of your business or home is going to be changed out with, I call it a smarter meter. I don't know if I can call it a smart meter, but a smarter meter, if you will. And when you look across this chart here, basically it's giving us an idea of the amount of mass energy is in this marketplace. You look at the volume of transactions, the volume of meters that are being installed. You see right now that, and this slide is probably about a couple of months old, there were 70 million meters that were committed to smart grid or AMI type projects, if you will. And this is only dealing with utilities of 100,000 or more, and only 14 or 15 million of those were installed. So there's an intense amount of energy across the US here to build this foundational project called Smart Grid, if you will, that will enable, we hope, some really, and we expect some really neat opportunities going forward, if you will. So kind of summarizing the last two slides here, AMI and the Smart Grid is going to provide this foundational support for the smart appliances, if you will, distributed or renewable energy sources, something to do with our plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and help us build a more intelligent grid, distributed energy grid, if you will. And ultimately where this is all going to drive us to, you'll hear some of these buzzwords, you'll hear advanced metering infrastructure, demand response, distributed generation, the self-healing network. These are all different terms that hopefully as you hear them, you'll start to say, ah, that's what the City of Fort Collins Utility is embarking upon here in your state here. So with that, that's the end of my discussion this morning. Thank you very much for letting me give you a high-level overview of what's happening from a national perspective, if you will.
So we have a few minutes. We have a few questions so far that I wanted to pose to some of our speakers here. The question was specifically what real-time data does a customer receive and in what units, and how does a customer actually receive that data? Now, Gary, I think you're going to go into quite a bit more detail on that in the second half of the program. So I'll probably let Gary go through that, and then if we need to answer it some more, then we'll do that at that time. And then we have a couple on economics and around reliability. So I think I'll probably pose those more than likely to Dennis. So question here is, if consumers are buying the question here is metering technology as they buy modems, won't we lose reliability? Do you want me to take a crack at that, Dennis, or do you want? I think what we're thinking is the metering itself is not something that somebody's going to be able to buy off the shelf. That will be a piece that's the foundation that we're talking about that will be installed and managed by the utility. But some of the accessories, the devices that might talk to that, are certainly going to be, we expect, coming from the marketplace. Now, a related reliability question is related to failure modes and effects analysis. So can any of you talk to kind of a failure modes analysis that might identify what those modes are and how they might be addressed? And it would sort of document the potential improvements in reliability. So we think there's going to be some better reliability improvements. Can you talk a little bit more about failure modes and how that fits into an analysis of that fits into improved reliability?
This could be a lengthy discussion, so I'm going to try to keep it at a pretty high level, and if somebody wants to get into extensive detail on that, we'd welcome the opportunity, but it probably quickly gets beyond the scope of our discussion today. In terms of our intent with respect to analyzing the effectiveness of reliability, etc., at this point, The way we collect data on system operation and system reliability is based on data we collect at our substations. We do not have data collection points at individual customer meters. The meter just doesn't have that level of sophistication. As we roll out this new project, we'll have substantially more data collection opportunities. We'll actually be monitoring system operation at the customer delivery level, and we'll be collecting that data, and that will help us analyze system operation. One typical area of great benefit that we anticipate with the project has to do with delivery voltage. Right now, when we are operating the electric system, the level of voltage at your delivery point is not generally collected. We don't know that your voltage is 120 volts, is 480 volts, etc. What we know is the delivery voltage at the substation. Then we use engineering analysis based on the size of our conductors, the length of the conductors, the operation of our transformers to determine what we understand to be the voltage at the delivery point. And we operate our system to try to keep those delivery voltages within an acceptable tolerance. That is, we hope, good engineering application. We aspire to conform with acceptable good practice, but we will have a better system. We will, with the rollout of the metering, we'll be able to know exactly what delivery voltages are at the customer site, and we hope to improve our ability to serve the customer.
Following, I think the example Pablo mentioned briefly as well, in that right now we find out about outages from all of you. So if an outage happens, phone calls start to come in, then our crews can start to identify the specific areas and go out and handle it. With this foundational technology with the meters, we'll know instantaneously pretty much where we have problems. And that's going to be an improvement in response time and in reliability as well. I'm going to put one more question out here, and I might try to answer this one myself. So we have two, they're both related to the economics of the project. So one was, since power is fairly cheap here, what is the economic impact and what is the payback period for the smart metering process? And the other related to the relationship between demand charges and fixed charges. And I think as we looked going into this, and we're able to look at, there's some very specific benefits related to how meters are read, how bills are distributed, and the timing and labor requirements of doing that. And in many ways, the AMI portion itself, just that piece, made some good economic sense purely from those operational pieces. We lay on top of that the benefits we expect to get from the additional layers, the additional communication technologies, the demand response components, then those benefits should accrue at a higher level. But the basic foundation project mostly made sense on an operational basis. We're shifting from what we've done for many years. Meters get read by somebody walking around, recording that information, it comes back, bills get sent out. That's going to be a very different business process as we move forward with this. Second, I'd say that we can't tell you, there's a lot that we're saying, well, we're not sure exactly what the future holds for this. And that's why we're starting with the foundation piece. We know the system's going to be much more dynamic in the future. We're going to have different generation resources. We're going to be looking at demand and supply side, a very dynamic environment, different than it is now. So that's what, again, we don't know all the pieces of that puzzle, and we can't because it's a rapidly changing environment. But the foundation piece makes sense now because it's going to give us the ability to work in that dynamic environment that we know is going to happen. So it's going to be very different than it is today. Can we tell you everything? No. But the foundation piece of the communication infrastructure and the meter, that communication layer that Pablo described, we know that's going to be necessary in any of the scenarios we go through.
I'm going to talk about our smart meter Fort Collins project. We've talked a lot about how that blends into what people are calling the smart grid. We have another project that we've been doing referred to as Fort Zed Jumpstart or RDSI project that is a little glimpse of what that future might look like. And I'm hoping we'll have time in this presentation to be able to talk a little bit about that. The project goals for our smart meter Fort Collins project are basically 4 items. 1, economic, to control operational costs and demand costs. 2, social, to give customers more information so they can make informed financial decisions, as well as informed decisions on use patterns. Environmental, to help us meet energy policy and climate action plan goals. These are a 1.5 energy efficiency improvement, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and demand reductions of 5% by 2015. And finally, to prepare for the future. The project has 4 major elements to it. The first is the advanced metering infrastructure and meter data management systems. This is the most highly visible part of the project. I'll talk a little bit about this as we get further along, and this is also the most expensive part of the project. This involves replacing all of our meters. We're talking a lot today about the electric side of the project, but as you probably all know, the City of Fort Collins Utilities is an integrated utilities, and we're doing the same with our water meters, although it doesn't tie into the ARA funding, the Department of Energy part of the project, in terms of trying to integrate our activities to enhance our ability to serve our community. We're addressing water metering as well as electric metering. Another part of the project is grid automation. In this respect, we're just starting the project, or just starting grid automation with this activity. When we say grid automation, what we're talking about is the ability to operate the electric system beyond the substation. Pablo showed a graphic earlier where it showed transmission lines coming into an electric substation. An electric substation functions very similarly to the breakers in your home. It's a place from which the power is distributed throughout the community. If we have a power system problem, if we need to control something on the electric system, that's where we have control remotely for the electric system. We don't have it any further into the distribution system. With grid automation, we will actually have the ability to control, to monitor, to automate the distribution system beyond the substation. Cybersecurity, Mark talked a little bit about that. Cybersecurity is a huge element to this project. We're concerned with all the elements of customer data, customer privacy. We're concerned with system operation. We're concerned with system control. As was noted earlier, we're overlaying a communications and control system over the traditional power distribution system. The cyber aspects of that are substantive. The cybersecurity aspects of that are likewise substantive. And then finally, enhanced demand response programs and customer engagement. This is the area where it's my job to try to control expectations. We have a 3-year project in terms of the DOE funding, in terms of the milestones to accomplish what I referred to earlier as our foundation. To a large degree, when that's all said and done, there'll be very little that you will see in the area of demand response programs and customer engagements. There'll be some, but it will be very limited. What you'll have is a foundation that will enable a number of things to unroll in the next few years. To give you a sense of the cost components of the project, as I mentioned, the metering is the lion's share of the cost. The other elements of cost, demand response, you can see the elements included here. The total cost of the project is $31.4 million. Rather than pass these around, I'll simply show them here, and at the end of the program, if anybody cared to see them, you may feel free. This large amount of expense has to do with replacing these traditional electromechanical meters. If you've ever looked at the meter on your home, you notice there's a small disc that spins around. Essentially, this is an electric motor. and the speed to which the disk rotates around is determined by how much electricity you're using at the time. And that's all it is. We'll be replacing these meters with something that looks like this. Think of your digital clock. There aren't moving parts in this. It's handled electronically. The advantages of this device is that it's more reliable, it's more accurate, and it will also have communications capability. Grid automation, what does that mean? What's that look like? I have just a couple of pieces of equipment here to help you understand what we're hoping to be able to do. First, I alluded to our ability to control the electric system out in the distribution network. This pad-mounted switchgear is an example of the piece of equipment. Again, using the analogy of your home, it would be like having a circuit breaker upstairs instead of just downstairs, possibly in the garage where your main panel is. And not just having a circuit breaker up there, but having a circuit breaker that can sense when one circuit's overloaded and reverse power flow to another circuit so that your needs can be maintained. This is a substantive change in terms of what we'll be able to do on the distribution system. This kind of capability has typically been used in the industry in transmission systems, but not at the distribution level. We'll simply be starting to roll this out and to utilize this kind of equipment. We'll likewise have communications and control back to our supervisor control operations, so we'll know more about what's happening in the electric system. The other device shown here is a fault indicator. When we have an electric system fault, what we see is at our substation, we may see a breaker open up. If the fault occurs far out in the system and simply takes off 50 or 100 homes, it's very possible we don't see a thing at our central control station. And we don't know there's a problem until customers start calling us. Then they call us, we look for patterns, what area of town's being called, we send crews out, we start mobilizing, we look to see what indications we can see as to where the problem is happening in the system. We use devices like this now. When we have a fault, they will give a color code that indicates there was a fault downstream from them. And we have to physically go to the locations on the electric system to try to find these, and then through a troubleshooting process, identify where the problem's located. We will have equipment that will instantaneously communicate back to our supervisory control. So we will get notifications before the customer even calls that something happened. Likewise, the meter will be able to notify us that something happened. And then the final example given here is power quality monitoring. We talked earlier about how will our power quality data improve, how will our effectiveness to serve our customers improve. We'll have high-speed recorder devices at customer or further out in the distribution system to help us better understand what's going on with the electric system. Pablo used the example of a 15-minute outage in an earlier slide. But today we have customers who are affected by a 15 millisecond, 15 thousandths of a second drop in their voltage by 20 to 25%. For some of our industrial customers, that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars of expense. And at this point, unless we happen to monitor that at the substation, we might not even see it. We'll be able to have equipment that will let us know more precisely what's going on with the electric system to enable us to enhance our ability to provide quality services. Cybersecurity, talked a little bit about the critical aspects of that. This starts to give you a sense of some of our objectives. I don't know that I need to read this all through to you, other than to point out that, as Mark indicated earlier in the presentation, the Department of Energy is actively engaged as part of national policy with this rollout of the smart meter system into the United States as a way of doing business. And as such, there's a very high level of sensitivity and appropriate concern around cybersecurity for the reasons we talked about earlier. There are a number of standards we're complying with. This is a very critical part of our project and something that we're taking very seriously. To give you some sense of some of the high-level timelines on our project, I have a couple of slides here that highlight different aspects of the project. First and foremost was completing our contract with the Department of Energy. They can see various other details as to key steps to the project. The project execution plan is a very formal document that we communicate to the Department of Energy the key steps to our project and how that will be done. It simply becomes the starting point from which our operational aspects of the project are measured. Cybersecurity plan lays out how we plan to address various cybersecurity elements. All of these activities will continue throughout the life of the project and far beyond. Customer response plan begins there at the beginning, metrics and benefits, as well as risk plan. This is a formal accounting procedure for project operation required by the Department of Energy, and then a rate discussion with ability to collect customer data, to communicate to customers on an incremental basis the electric use. It opens the door for many, many opportunities in terms of how to provide rate structures for customers. And we'll begin that discussion at the first part of the year. There'll be presentations with City Council, so on and so forth. We'll be requesting proposals for many parts of the project. One that we have completed is for project management and technical consultant. Mark is with Inspiria Solutions. That's the company we selected to provide that support. Our concern, we felt we could do this project, but this is one of the biggest projects we've ever done. It's a critical project. We have a critical timeline. We want to make sure we have the brightest and the best helping us do the best job we possibly can in this project. We want to make sure that we are aware of all the changes in the marketplace, of the availability of products, of some of the deficiencies of products. Where are others finding failures? Where are others finding success? We felt we needed a broader base of support to help us bring the highest value to the community that we could. We were pleased that Inspiria was one of the proposers, and we feel that we have an excellent partner helping us to do this project. There are other aspects of the project, the automated meter, cybersecurity, and demand response, and this gives you a sense of the anticipated time frame. And then finally, what is going to be the most visible part of this project for our 100,000 plus neighbors in the community who maybe aren't following the details of what's happening? The meter deployment. That's when we replaced 65,000 electric meters, 25,000 water meters. We traipsed through everybody's yard. We're needing to get through the fence, hopefully not have conflicts with the dogs, turn off the power, turn it back on. There's no doubt this will be disruptive, this will be invasive. We're going to do the best that we possibly can to give people advance notice, let folks know what we're doing. You'll see another big red bar there is customer education. It's our intent to outreach, to reach out to the public, make sure folks are aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, etc. But we don't have any illusions that this will not be disruptive. We'll be turning people's power off, disrupting water service for every single customer we have in the course of rolling out this project. And the last that will be highly visible will be as we implement the demand response outreach. Talked about smart meters. That's part of the deal, but that's not the only part of the deal. To give you a sense of some of the opportunities that this new metering, this new AMI system will facilitate. We'll start to have ability for a variety of rate options. I know when a utility guy comes up and talks rates, I know the first thing that goes on in my mind is how much they're going to increase. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is the ability to give customers a higher level of choice in terms of how you use your electricity. You go to the grocery store and you don't say, I'll take a bag of groceries. You go to the grocery store and you decide what it is you want, what serves your needs, what you're interested in. And we hope to be able to be at a place where we can allow customers to make more choices in terms of what it is they want, what it is they value. We may in the future have a customer who has a high green values and they want to be able to run their electric kiln, but they don't want to be operating that when a coal plant's generating energy. They want to know, when is a wind turbine going to be producing energy? When do we expect that The solar system would be available. We hope to be able to communicate to customers choices so that if you want to make your decisions based on available resources, you can. For those who are economically motivated, we want to give customers the best pricing signals we can so that customers can make their choices. Certain times of the day, electricity costs more than other times of the day. If you have the choice, if you want to make the choice to use your electricity in different ways, we want to be able to give you the information to make those informed choices. With the AMI system, we'll be putting the infrastructure that will enable that to happen. Demand response, that gets into some of the initiative that we would be taking. Gary will discuss that following my part of the presentation and try to give you some images of what things may evolve in the next 4, 5, 6 years as the program starts to be realized, the potential of what we're doing starts to be realized. Remote service connects. As you know, we got a big university in town. We have a lot of folks who are moving in and out and in and out. It costs money to be able to disconnect a meter, reconnect a meter. One opportunity that we have is to be able to do that all remotely, reduce costs, reduce our timeliness to be able to serve customers. So there are a number of opportunities that this foundation will enable us to realize in the future. I think I'm in good shape on time. And although not part of this project, a totally separate project we're doing starts to give, I think, a view of what could this all look like 10 years from now, 15 years from now, where are we headed? Some years ago, the Department of Energy rolled out a request for proposals for what they called the renewable and distributed systems integration. Their concern at the time was many people see a future where instead of the utility system being this one-way system of central power plants, we start to see a system where people have photovoltaic systems scattered throughout the community, where fuel cell technology becomes an operational and viable alternative, where wind turbines are dispersed throughout the community, where people have plug-in hybrid electric vehicles that many times are charging and getting their batteries charged to operate, but at other times have fully charged batteries and are resources available to serve the electric system. Given that view of the future, how's the electric system going to work? That's not the way the electric system was built. That's not the way it's been operated. It has not been a common carrier like the highways. It's been a distribution system, a one-way system like the water pipelines. How's that going to work? In response to that request for proposals, the City of Fort Collins and others put together a grant request. We were awarded a project. This is a cooperative study is the term the Department of Energy uses. Kind of high level, that means try it and see what you learn. And that's the project we have. It's a 3-year project. We're currently about halfway through that project. Calendar year 2011 will be our operational year. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what that is, how that works, because I think it starts to set the stage about what's this vision of a smart grid. Please keep in mind it's very limited. This involves 5 sites. This involves 2 electric circuits out of our Linden Tech substation. This doesn't involve 100,000 citizens. It doesn't involve all commercial customers. It's very limited, but it starts to give a glimpse of where could we be headed with this. From the DOE's perspective, the RDSI project is a collaborative study. They have 9 projects across the US. We're one of those. They're microgrids or developing technologies that will enhance microgrids. The objective is to encourage the use of distributed resources. You can read that. And for those of you who would be interested in seeing more about this, if you go to the Smart Grid site, you'll be able to see this. You can either go through the Department of Energy. This website I gave is an article that the Electric Power Research Institute did some research on these 9 projects, and they have a synopsis of our problems, of our program. So again, the key part here is smartgrid.epri.com if you're interested in seeing what the Electric Power Research Institute has to say. In our project, we have a project team. Project lead is the City of Fort Collins as the prime contractor, Fort Collins Utilities. We have demonstration sites. I mentioned to you we have 5 demonstration sites. We have City Hall, some city buildings in the Old Town area, New Belgium Brewing, Colorado State University, basically the east half of the main campus, Larimer County at the county buildings downtown, and Intergrid is a lab operated out of the CSU Energy Lab, the Old City Power Plant at the Poudre River and College Avenue. We have other partners in this project who are bringing different things to the table. Spray and Brendel Group are providing consulting services and play operational roles in the project. Colorado State University is actually wearing 3 hats in this project. One is the main campus as a participant, one is the Intergrid Lab as a site participant, the third is the CSU Mechanical Engineering Department in doing some R&D aspects to the project. Advanced Energy is providing a photovoltaic inverter. You may have seen in the paper about 6 months ago when New Belgium's PV system came online. That is part of this project, and the PV inverter there is part of it. Woodward Governor with power management, mixed fuel, Eaton Corporation, switchgear, and the Intergrid Lab with various resources. This gets a whole lot more complicated that I'm going to ask you to bear with me on. But the point of this slide is to give you some idea of the complexity of this project. We have a pretty interwoven and highly collaborative project that's going on here. Those boxes are our site partners. That's where the actual operation is taking place. All the rest of it is to try to make it work. And it requires some fairly intense collaboration. As you can imagine, trying to do this project over the last 3 years has been a little bit of an ordeal. As I suspect all of you know, economic conditions have not been good. That's been difficult for many of our site partners in terms of trying to fit this into the budget. We have challenges trying to work through retail and wholesale electric rates. And the shining star of New Belgium, who's had their own problems. They introduced their beer into the southeast thinking that it would keep their market stable. It's been a smashing success, so they've been trying to do this project while expanding to meet a growing market. So we've had our challenges, but to the credit of all the partners and the collaboration, we're making good progress. This is a video that we put together as part of the project. One part of our responsibilities in the DOE grant is to provide some information about the project, and I think that this video was put together by our city cable TV people, and I thought they did a fabulous job. I hope you'll enjoy it. This starts to give a real sense of what this project's about.
The following video describes Fort Zed, Fort Collins Zero Energy District, and the Renewable and Distributed Systems Integration Project, which is made possible through a grant from the U.S. Department of Energy.
Fort Zed is an initiative to convert downtown Fort Collins and the main campus of Colorado State University into a net zero energy district. And the idea of a zero energy district is it's a district that generates as much energy as it uses on an annual basis from local resources.
And the RDSI grant is important because it starts that process. And what it does is shows from a research and development standpoint and a testing standpoint that we can reduce peak energy demand in this district by a significant amount, in this case 5 megawatts. While this won't achieve a zero energy district in and of itself, it will certainly start moving us in that direction.
In order to have a zero energy district, you need a diversity of resources. Sometimes you need to make electricity, sometimes you need to reduce electric use. So the purpose of this study is to see how can we make all of these different components work together to deal with times of electric system peak. Electric systems have peaks similar to rush hour peaks. We have a hot July day, bright, beautiful sun shining, 90 degrees and climbing. People are turning on their air conditioners, maybe turning on the television. Businesses using electricity. Those are the kinds of things that create an electric system peak.
One dream we all have is to utilize the power plants more effectively. Right now, at night they slow way down and shut down, and during the day they work really too hard.
It's probably between 20 and 30% of all of the capital investment in electric generation is used just during that small number of peak hours.
Our power supplier is Platte River Power Authority. Their base load unit is a large coal power plant. They run that continuous, 24/7. When we are experiencing an electric peak, when customers are demanding more electricity, they will start to turn on their gas turbines. A gas turbine might be thought of as a large stationary jet engine with a generator at the back of it. So it's a way to meet these short peak time periods. Peak impacts you in terms of what you have to do to generate electricity. Typically, you have to move to a less efficient resource. It impacts the electric distribution system, the entire network. In a road, you have to build the highway so that you can handle that peak traffic. On the electric system, we have the same situation. When we have those peaks, that's what we have to build the electric system for.
So if we can reduce peak loads, then we can prevent the building of new power plants and all of the CO2 emissions that come from creating more electricity.
We have a number of partners in this Fort Zed project. Those partners include the City of Fort Collins, Larimer County, Colorado State University at their main campus, New Belgium Brewing, and then finally the CSU Engines Lab.
The Integrid facility at the Engines and Energy Conversion Lab is a joint operation between CSU and SPRE.
And this is a world-class facility for doing power research. At this lab, we're installing several generators, and those generators will be used as part of the peak shaving experiment, which is the core of RDSI.
This study is focused on one substation of the utility.
So the Linden substation is the substation that distributes energy from Platte River Power Authority to New Belgium, to the eastern portion of the CSU campus, and also to the Larimer County buildings.
We wanted to get a limited number of partners who could actively participate and who had the potential to have fairly large loads.
Out in the power grid as a whole, there are many small generators which are not used at all for power generation to the grid. Things like backup generation at hospitals or data centers. The idea behind the RDSI project is to utilize those distributed generators just during that small number of peak hours. Now, as a side effect of doing that distributed generation, it makes it easier to integrate renewables. So you can put PV panels on more roofs, you can put small wind turbines spread around the community.
We also want to demonstrate that it's possible to show that peak reduction in an environmentally responsible manner.
The RDSI project uses current technology like diesel engines. Those are relatively dirty. The same control system could be applied to new upcoming technologies like fuel cells, storage systems, natural gas engines, and others.
Some of our partners are bringing equipment. Woodward Governor is an example of that.
Well, we're very happy to be part of the Fort Zed Jumpstart Energy Project. Woodward has a generator control platform called the EasyGen, and this is used globally to start and stop and synchronize generators for critical applications. We have a product for clean burning natural gas buses and trucks. We make wind converters for large wind turbines, and we also have a system for treating diesel exhausts to clean up emissions.
So part of the problem with the historical structure of the current power grid is that it's built around having a small number of large generating plants and a large number of small consumers.
What is the smart grid? What does that mean? The old grid is just a one-way path, and it's based on very little knowledge about what is going on out there at the customer. What just got turned on? What could be turned off? What other resources does the customer have? Today's electric system doesn't know that.
And where we're going with renewables and this other distributed integration is we're starting to have power flow in multiple directions. This is a real new way of thinking about the control systems and how do you orchestrate many small resources spread through the grid.
One of the issues that we need to be able to deal with in smart grid research is being able to put more renewable energy on the grid. And the difficulty with that is that renewable energy being generated from variable sources like wind and solar is not as predictable. We get a very variable output power. And this is our wind turbine simulator, and here I have a diesel engine connected to a generator, and I can essentially play a profile of a wind turbine into this diesel engine. So this could be recorded data from the field. Now the diesel engine will play the role of the wind spinning the rotor on the wind turbine, and then the generation will produce that variable output power, and that feeds into the rest of the grid system here at Intergrid. That gives us the capability to simulate an entire grid that includes any mix of renewable and traditional generation.
A big part of this project is really the coordination of all of these very different types of resources. Array is providing software to be able to capture key information that we need about what is available, how long is it available for, and how much capacity it can provide to the system. And so if you can imagine this picture here applied 4 other times to represent the total of 5 site partners that are involved in this project, is how do you get the information that you need to be able to achieve the peak reductions that we're interested in.
Brendel Group is an engineering and sustainability consulting firm here in Fort Collins. And one of our roles in the RDSI project is to help coordinate the operations of Spire's control system with the partner sites. So we help the partners identify those assets that could be controlled to help reduce the peak demand. This information then becomes part of Spire's database. The challenge, of course, is to identify those loads that are non-essential or do not have a negative impact on thermal comfort or partners' operations.
Not only do we have a situation where hardware and equipment has to work, where communications has to work, it also has to make business sense.
We jumped at the chance to participate in the RDSI grant because producing all of our own energy on site, being a net zero energy producer, has long been a goal of ours. We put together close to 1 megawatt in assets, which includes both on-site generation and load shedding. For our on-site generation, we installed 200 kilowatts of solar photovoltaic. Advanced Energy has been a great partner to us on the project. They actually donated the inverter for our PV array. We have a cogen, an engine that produces both heat and power that runs off of methane, and we're also going to do a better job of capturing the heat from the engine and using it during the process.
This mix of renewable energy, of on-site traditional generation, and of load reduction can all be present on one site. The system is constantly monitoring what's going on at the feeder level. It is also looking at what the individual partners are saying is available, identifying if there's a peak that is imminent and evaluating whether or not controls should be implemented at a particular time.
We are tying into the smart grid so that when we get a signal from the city that the utility is drawing at peak power, we'll be able to shut these loads off.
So they're reducing their consumption of electricity just by turning things off. This is always the most desirable because it doesn't cost anything. There's no pollution associated with it. It's basically free energy savings. We would look at then what the other partners are doing and go through a similar process with each of those partners.
We have 2 assets that are going to be part of our demonstration site. The first one is the fountain here at the Larimer County Justice Center. We're going to be able to shut this fountain off to conserve electricity during peak load times, and then of course when the load goes down we can turn it back on again automatically as well.
We've just chosen one element to use as a demonstration, but really you could identify any number of these assets within your building and control it according to the demand and the signal received from the utility.
Now we're here on the roof of the Larimer County Courthouse office building located at 200 West Oak. This is the location of our second RDSI project. This array is 26.82 kW. Now here, we're just trying to demonstrate the ways in which you can take renewable energy assets like PV and tie them into the grid, whether you're bringing energy into the building or if the building wasn't using it all, send it back out.
In the case of CSU, they have a number of areas where they can reduce their load on different buildings by turning down the air handling units in those buildings. They have quite a bit of solar generation. They also have 3 backup generators.
We're down in the basement of an NESB building. This is one of our typical natural gas emergency generators. We'll bring this generator on along with a greenhouse generator, one at our cooling plant. We're concerned about noise generation, the incremental carbon footprint. This is natural gas, so it burns pretty clean, but is it really more clean and more efficient than running the power plants back, at rawhide? we'll find that out.
Electric vehicles are potentially a more and more important factor in how we consume electricity. There'll be a Ford Escape hybrid and a Toyota Prius hybrid, both of which will have their battery packs upgraded so that they can run for a limited time as pure electric vehicles.
What might evolve in the future would be to use those as a resource that has the potential to be used for transportation, if not being used for transportation, yet fully charged, a resource that can provide power into the electric system. That's where we're headed. That's the new vision of where the smart grid will take us. It's a 3-year project. The first 2 years we're involved with getting things operational, getting things set up. Our operation year will be calendar year 2011.
Not only are we building out a smart grid, but using local talent to do that.
We've estimated that the initial phase, the RDSI project, will create and sustain about 300 jobs locally.
It gets us started, and it'll be a great demonstration to show what's possible in the future.
Again, that's just meant to give you a glimpse of where we may be headed. Will that be a correct depiction of what we see 10 years from now? Probably not, but maybe half of it is, and I don't know which half that is. So we're trying to prepare, we're trying to understand what the future might look like, and the project is intended to lay a foundation to be able to serve what we believe is an evolving future.
All right, so we've heard about this big vision, and we've just got a glimpse of the future through Dennis's video. And but you know, we've got these smart meters going in, and what's this going to mean for you, and what's it going to mean for your business? Are there valuable things that you can do with this? So. It's important to set some context for this. There are a lot of things that are going to be changing in the near future, and this sets the environment in which these things are going to happen. So one thing is changing electric rate structures. We've had pretty similar, pretty much the same electric rate structures for some time now, and it's looking like there may be a change coming down the road. So I'll talk about that a little bit. There are environmental issues. People want to take more control of how they interact with the environment and their effect on the environment, and these tools that are coming can enable that. There's some city policies like the Climate Action Plan and the energy policy and the water policy, and those will affect how we use electricity and energy as well. And within all this, there is lots of information coming in from the smart grid. We're going to have these meters that are able to store lots of data and provide lots of data to you. And how can we utilize that to take action on these different areas? Before we dive in too deep, I want to make sure that we have some terminology in common here. I'm sure most of you understand the difference between demand and energy when we're talking about electricity, but I just want to cover it real quick, make sure we're all talking about the same thing. So really power or demand is how fast we're using electricity. And if I have this hairdryer here, and let's say it's 1,000 watts, and that's 1 kilowatt, and I turn that hairdryer on, I'm demanding that much power. I'm demanding 1 kilowatt of power. Whether I run that for 2 hours or 2 seconds, I need to have all the wires and the breakers and everything in place to be able to provide that much power. So this demand tends to relate to more the infrastructure, the wires, the switches, the transformers, the things that we have to have in place to provide that power. Conversely, if I have this 18-watt compact fluorescent, I don't need to have nearly as much infrastructure to power this. Then there's electric energy. And if, let's say I take a long shower, my hair is really wet, and I have to dry my hair for an hour, so I use 1 kilowatt for 1 hour. I've used 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. So this tends to relate more to fuel back at the power plant, whether it's coal or natural gas. And then as a result, that really relates to carbon dioxide emissions and other emissions. So it's something that we want to pay attention to. So I run this for an hour. I've used 1 kilowatt hour. For this load here, I have to run it for 55 hours to use 1 kilowatt hour. So our current rates, we kind of fall into 3 buckets. There's more than 3 rates, but generally we can think of them in 3 different ways. There's an energy rate for residential customers, and it's just a straight roughly 7 cents per kilowatt hour, regardless of if you have everything in your house on or nothing on or that sort of thing. And then we have a facilities demand charge that applies to larger residential customers and small commercial customers. And this has a little bit lower energy rate coupled with a demand charge. And that demand charge, it doesn't matter what time of day it hits, but whatever your maximum use is for the month, there's a charge associated with that. And then we have our coincident peak rate. So it has an energy charge like the others. It's a lower energy charge. Has a facilities charge too, but it also has this thing called a coincident peak rate. And that's whatever your facility is using at the time the utility hits their peak. There's a charge associated with that, and it's fairly high. So for some customers, that can be up to half of their bill. So it's a really important thing to pay attention to. And so Dennis mentioned that this is a water project too. So we have tiered rates on water. Your first 7,000 gallons are one amount, and then up to 13,000 gallons is another higher cost per gallon, and then beyond that is an even higher cost per gallon. So in the future, this may look different, and there are a lot of different rates out there, and I'll give you an illustration of a couple that may be possible that we would see here in Fort Collins. One is a time of use rate, and that's simply electricity costs different amounts at different times of the day. There's typically an off-peak and an on-peak rate, or there may be more a mid-peak. There's a critical peak price rate that's essentially built on a time of use rate, but there may be some periods during the year, maybe 5 or 15 periods during the year, where electricity is really expensive, and we're going to pass that through. So we might notify you a day in advance that we've got a critical peak price coming between 3 and 5 tomorrow. Energy is going to be 50 cents a kilowatt hour, so pay attention. And then there's sort of the opposite of that is peak time rebate, kind of the same idea that tomorrow we're going to hit this peak between 3 and 5. If you reduce energy, we'll give you a rebate at the end of the month for reducing your energy. Coincident peak may be going away, may not. We don't know yet. There's a lot of discussion right now about what new rates look like on the wholesale side and on the retail side as well. Here's an example from Toronto Hydro. They just recently implemented a time of use rate, and this is a 3-tiered rate. It's got an off-peak component, a mid-peak, and an on-peak, and you can see the different prices there. And then just imagine this rate being in place, and maybe for critical peak there might be a period when hot summer afternoon we might push a higher price out for this for maybe just a couple hours during that peak period. So instead of 9 cents, it might be 30 cents or 50 cents. So in Fort Collins, we already have some existing smart elements, if you will, some elements of the smart grid. For about a dozen years, we've had automated meter reading for our large commercial and industrial customers. There are one-way meters that call up utilities every night and upload data to the utility so it's available to us and to our customers through a program we call ElectriConnect. We also have a load management program that's been in place since 1982, and basically we call them switches. They're devices out in the field that are on water heaters and air conditioners. When we enter a period that we think might be a coincident peak, we send out a signal, a radio signal that controls these devices, and it turns off the water heaters and cycles air conditioners. We also have commercial customers. Probably some of you in this room have these devices hooked up to building automations or systems or lights, and they initiate load shedding routines when that signal goes out as well. This program right now, we're able to shed about 5 megawatts, so that's pretty significant. And this helps reduce purchase power cost. We've saved customers, since this program's been in place, over $6 million, and that's a pretty big deal. Here's an example of some ElectriConnect data that is available now. This is day after data, so we can, in this example, look at peaks for, these are daily peaks, and you can see the weekdays and weekends here. And then this is tunneling down into a specific peak day, and you can see 15-minute data on a profile there. So that's enough of what we have now, and we have some basic elements that are part of this smart grid customer interaction. On the initial level, we have this meter. It's collecting all this amazing data, maybe on a 15-minute interval. It's stored in a computer back at the utility. How can you use this to manage your energy? Before we even get any devices in the home or any of that, we have this idea of a web portal, and this is something that'll be available probably within a couple of years here in Fort Collins, that you'll be able to go, any customer with a smart meter will be able to go in and look at their electric use data. And this will help you decide how and when you're going to use electricity, estimate your monthly bill, look up electricity use history, and all these other aspects that's down this list. You can even sign up for notifications. Maybe you want to know for a water rate when you're going to hit that next tier, and it's the 25th of the month and you're about to go into the third tier. You might decide, I'm going to stop watering this month. You know, I'm going to wait till the first of the month before I do any more watering. And same thing with electricity. Here's an example of one of these web portals from Oklahoma Gas and Electric. We were just at a conference with them. They are doing a study with 3,000 customers. They have a couple of these different rates that I explained with these customers. And in this case, I really like this page. You open it up. This is the first thing you'd see. And it says, today you've used 30 kilowatt hours. That's $14.35. Obviously, they have different rates than we do, because that would be a little lower. And then there's this next piece. What would your bill be? So far, you've used $70 this month, and essentially they project that out, that if you keep going at this rate, your bill is going to be $120 this month. And you might go, wow, that's pretty high. I'm going to cut back for the rest of the month. And then you can see your usage for the previous week. You go, wow, Monday was a big day. I wonder what I was doing with my energy that day. And then there's a button over on the right. You can tunnel down into that. You can look at a month's data or a year's data if you want to do that. Maybe look at 15-minute data if you really want to understand what's going on in your home. In this particular case, they were on a tiered rate. That's like the water rate that I described, but it's only for electricity. So this customer has gone up through the first two tiers. They're in the third tier, but it gives an average of what their energy cost has been for that period. Here's another customer that's on a critical peak price rate, and it shows the structure of the rate up there on the top right. But I think what's really valuable down here is it's showing them of each component for off-peak, on-peak, and critical peak, how much money they spent on each one of those things. So you can actively manage and understand how you're spending money on electricity. If you have more of an environmental concern, then here's a page that gets into what's the carbon impact of the electricity you're using. And this is probably a large commercial customer because we're talking about metric tons of CO2 and number of airplane trips and things like that this is equivalent to. But it gives you a good idea how many trees would you have to plant to offset the carbon that you're generating from your electricity use. And then sort of the next step from the web portal, you still don't have anything in your home per se, is pushing this information out to a handheld device. First really entry point into your home or into your business is what we call an in-home display. But these are essentially have a connection to the meter, and in some cases they might be connected to the internet, and they provide information to you. They would know, for instance, in a time of use rate, what period you're on, what the cost of electricity is, and would tell you. And they would keep track of your energy cost for the month. They might pull some meter from the data and have a little graph that tells you what your energy use is for the last week. They can be real simple. This is a glowy thing. It glows different colors. It might sit on your desk or on your kitchen counter, and say it starts glowing red, you know you're in a peak period, run around, turn some things off. Or they can be very elaborate. They can be a photo frame with a calendar and have a weather report, and it has all your utility information on there too. I think the important thing to think about this is, as the other speakers have said, this is really just a platform. It's a starting point with the smart meter, and it provides a foundation for you to do a lot of things. So you have a lot of flexibility and choice on how you want to interact with that. The in-home display is just something on a very basic level that you can look at and get information and make decisions based on that. The first level of actually controlling things in your home in an automated way would be what's called a programmable communicating thermostat, or a PCT. And again, this could be connected to your meter or to the internet. And it's going to be aware of pricing. This is one here you can see. It's set up on a tiered rate. It happens to be in the first tier. So maybe you program this thermostat. When I hit the second tier, I don't want to have a air conditioning set point of 74 anymore. I'm okay with 78, and I'll live with that. Same thing with time of use. It might be programmed with time of use, and you can set that up any way you want. Typically, these would be also connected with your web portal. So instead of that painful method of going through and pushing buttons to program your thermostat that we've also all experienced, and a lot of thermostats don't get programmed for that reason, you can go into your web portal and there's a nice big screen, and you can put in all your usages and conditions in there. Just like the in-home displays, these have a lot of different flavors. And kind of the direction these are going is that it might be a thermostat and an in-home display at the same time. The next level gets a little more sophisticated, and this gets into the home area network and an energy management system. Now, I'm just curious, how many people have a wireless router in their home for their internet? About 70% probably. So all you people already have a home area network now. And so that isn't anything new. The difference here is we would be adding what would be called a gateway or an energy management system that is communicating with the meter. It's communicating probably through the internet, and it's connected to all these devices. It's a central gateway. It contains the intelligence of what you want to have happen in your house based on a certain price signal or some event. This is an example of one company's product. It's basically an in-home display, but it's also a gateway. And from this, you can program your thermostat. It's connected to other smart devices in your home, like power strips and plugs and things like that. And then through the internet, it's connected to your web portal, through your handheld devices, to your meter, or maybe that line from the meter goes directly to the portal. These are some screens that might pop up on this device. This says, to save you money, your thermostat's been set 4 degrees higher. It will return to normal once the event is over. You may override the energy saving mode immediately by pressing the opt-out button. So most of these situations, you have the ability to opt out if you maybe you're having some friends over, you'd rather have it be 74 than 78 degrees, and so you just hit opt out and you're back to your base set point. Here's another screen at the bottom that shows the actual power usage of your home. And so this is a great tool. I've seen these in action where you can go around and you're not sure how much a particular appliance uses, so you can go around, unplug it or turn off a breaker and watch an immediate response on this and get an idea of what the real power use of your appliances are. Down on the bottom is an away button and a good night button. So you would program those, all the devices that you want to turn off or affect when you go away. And so instead of running upstairs and downstairs and make sure all the lights are turned off, you walking out the door, hit the away button, or you're going to bed and hit the good night button. And then the next stage are smart appliances. There are big manufacturers like GE and Whirlpool that are manufacturing devices with chips in them that would communicate wirelessly with this gateway. And so that's just another thing that you're going to add on to that gateway or that energy management system that you might tell your dryer you're not allowed to run during a peak period. Just plain and simple, I only want you to run off peak. And you can program, this is a heat pump water heater, you might program it to be off during a peak period since it's got all that hot water storage. There's lots of other opportunities. There's thermal energy storage that Pablo mentioned. These are basically big tanks of water that get made into ice in off-peak periods, and then you can melt that ice during the on-peak period. And then again, that can be communicating with your meter and your energy management system so that it's optimized to run and minimize your electricity costs. This is something that Estes Park is doing, has been doing for years. They actually have and have had for quite some time a time of use rate in Estes Park because they have a lot of electric heat there. So this is basically electric heat with some ceramics blocks. They call it affectionately rocks in a box. And it's during off-peak periods, it uses electric resistance heat to heat up those blocks. And then during a peak period, it would turn off the electric heat and then just extract the heat from those blocks. There are load switches that can communicate with this system. They can control water heaters or hot tubs, pumps. And then of course on the commercial side there are energy management systems that can receive pricing signals or other information from the grid and respond accordingly, initiating load shed routines. Maybe you want to drop, when this price signal happens, you want to drop the second stage of compressors on your rooftop units and your lighting, dim your lighting by 10% and turn off your water heaters, those sorts of things. Electric vehicles. Pablo mentioned this, and this is an interesting one. It's a real opportunity, and it's going to be a real challenge at the same time. There are a number of vehicles that are coming out on the market very soon. We talked to utilities at this conference last week that are receiving batches of the Nissan Leaf and the Chevy Volt very soon to do pilot testing. This is going to be a big load on the electric grid. Now we have the generation capacity to charge these vehicles. Here's a profile for Platte River for summer, and here's a winter profile. And there's lots of capacity over here on the shoulders for charging vehicles. So that's not a huge concern, at least for quite a while. A bigger challenge is going to be charge management around the distribution part of the utility. There's basically two levels of charging right now. There's essentially three, but the third level is we're not going to see for a while. But in the immediate future, we're going to see 120 volt charging, and that's equivalent to the hairdryer, and 240 volt charging that's more like your stove or your dryer as far as a load. So these vehicles, when they're in the 240 volt charging mode, are pulling about 6.5 kilowatts. So imagine a distribution transformer that serves about 8 to 10 homes. Everybody comes home at 5 o'clock and they plug their electric vehicle in, and their air conditioner's running, and the big screen TV's on, all those things. So that could be a big shock to the grid, and we would not have the capacity to serve that. So it's going to be really important to do smart charging, as it were, that these vehicles are plugged in and they work through the energy management system and hopefully through the utility to optimize the charging period, so these things aren't all on at once and challenging the distribution system. So that was kind of a big drink from the fire hose for in-home, in-business devices. Few takeaways that I see is that we're going to have lots of data here, and it's going to be sitting there in the archives, and we can utilize it and do lots of great things with it and make important energy decisions to impact our environment and reduce our electricity cost. It's going to be a baby step process, as Dennis stated, that we're just going to be setting the foundation for this. There is some money in the Smart Grid grant for demand response, so you'll be seeing a web portal, some in-home devices. How we deliver those is not entirely clear yet. Pablo mentioned the retail model with Home Depot and places like Best Buy, and there are active discussions going on from the manufacturers of these devices with those kinds of businesses. So there are different ways that this might be delivered. It might be a traditional utility program like our load management program is now, where the utility installs a device and we give you a rebate, or it might be something that you're just motivated because of a time of use rate to go to Best Buy and buy an energy management system or a PCT or something like that and get going on it. And maybe there's a utility incentive for that. So the other thing is that this is a pretty dynamic field. There are a lot of market forces, there's a lot of players, there's some things that are going to be shaking out in the next few years, and there's some standards that are being solidified as we speak. So we're being patient with that process. We don't want to jump in before some of these standards are finalized. And so expect to see some emergence of this in about a year or so. There'll be some things going out, but we're not going to, this is going to be lagging the installation of the smart meters a bit. And I think we're all happy to entertain questions.
I'll be answering a few myself and farming out a few of the other ones. So, first one really has to do with different business process. So it says different business process, question mark. How will meters be read? How will bills be sent out? How will that change? And you know, in retrospect, maybe we should have addressed that a little bit more in this, but that is kind of an internal picture, certainly. So it wasn't the focus of our presentations today. But certainly if you think about it, utilities in general and Fort Collins utilities in particular, historically we provide that electricity in the infrastructure and we send somebody out once a month. We read the meter, we mail out a bill, you send us a check, everybody's happy. That entire process is going to have to change. So we will have data that can be done in a continual fashion. So the intervals of the billing periods, how those meters are read, how we turn things on and off, Dennis mentioned. So when we have thousands of students move in right now, we're driving trucks around. Every time a meter has to be a move in or move out, somebody's got to drive a truck out there and read it. So it is going to be an enormous internal change, as well as on our IT side. And also, we understand clearly that in essence, we're going to be running both systems in parallel during the transition period. So we're going to be implementing the smart meters at the same time we're reading the smart meters for a period in the old-fashioned way. And that's partly redundancy and quality assurance and making sure everything's correct. So it is, from sort of the back office side, revolutionary, even though we're saying on the customer side, these initial steps isn't really a big impact. your meter is going to get read a different way. You may have different opportunities for how you want to pay that bill. That's about it for the short run. And then in the long run, the picture is revolutionary and changes. So I hope that answers that one pretty well. This one I might get some help from Mark and Dennis. So is this type of system online anywhere else? And what are kind of the end cost savings based on those existing systems in place?
Smart meter systems are in deployment across the United States here. Some of them that you've no doubt heard about are off in the state of California there. If you look at Pacific Gas Electric Company, who has been in the press, they have across the northern part of that state, there are about between 6 and 7 million of these smart meters that have been deployed over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. So we certainly are watching that. They've made the press in various ways, shapes, and forms. Southern California has a large number of deployments out there. If you flip over onto the opposite coast, over in the East Coast, PEPCO, PHI in the DC area, has a large program underway right now with the technology. Go down to Texas and you look at the Texas marketplace, you've got 3 to 4 million smart meters installed there, and then smatterings all over the place. Many of these programs aspire to do something similar that Fort Collins is, which is they have the platform and the foundation that will allow them to enter into the home marketplace, into the home area network, programmable thermostats and different entities. But like Fort Collins, they're taking a little bit of a watch and wait and see. They're getting the foundation in place, and then over time they will expand as the market and the customers dictate to move into those different aspects of the delivery of those types of services.
I'd guess another part of that question is you're paying 31 million bucks. Is that a cost-effective investment? I'm not going to get into all the details on that. I want to keep it at a fairly high level. But what we're doing on a financial picture on the project is half of the funding is coming from the Department of Energy through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. The other half of the money is coming by issuing debt. And the payoff on that debt is such that the funds generated, the savings generated by the program will pay off that debt over the time frame. I think it's like a 5, 6, 7 year payoff. So the net impact in terms of rates of the program should be 0. In the long term, we will have put an infrastructure in place that will enable us to offer a variety of services, will enable us to enhance the capability to provide quality services for our customers. Another way to look at this is that of the AMI project, say it's 16 million bucks, we've got about 65,000 customers, that's $200, $250 per customer. When I get out my crystal ball, what do I think things are going to look like 5, 6, 7 years from now? As Gary mentioned, a good majority of us in this room have wireless routers. I think that the capability that this investment is going to offer for our customers, that $250 investment will more than be matched by what people will be investing in their homes in order to utilize the information, to utilize the data, to interface the capability to achieve personal goals. Now, how will that play out? Again, I'm going to get my crystal ball out and guess that the marketplace is going to be offering a lot of devices. There's going to be a lot of things that Best Buy is going to come to the market with. There's going to be things Home Depot is going to come to the market with. Who would have anticipated years ago when Dick Tracy was talking into his phone that today we'd have situations where somebody can pull up their BlackBerry, can turn on things in their home, turn off things in their home, see how their investments are doing, send a text to the kids, make sure things are fine. I think that the investment that we're making in this is going to put the electric system, the distribution system, the control, the data, the operation that you have of your home into a totally different paradigm. And I think that's really the big picture of what's going on. Again, understand that in the next 3 years, you're going to see that? I don't think so. In the next 3 years, all you're going to see is that somebody was traipsing through your yard, they turned off your power, they turned off your water, but there's going to be an infrastructure in place that's going to facilitate, I think, many things that we can just imagine at this time.
I want to add something, and it's one of the aspects that I know was touched on there was kind of what pieces of this do we have now, and in terms of it's our larger customers that are on our coincident peak rate that Gary talked about. but it also represents about half of the electricity that's used in the community. So about of those larger customers and that half the electricity, they're already used to watching websites, looking at when the price signal might be hitting coincident peak. They're engaged already in that fashion. And they're going to have more and better information, and then we're also going to be providing that essentially to all customers to be able to do that. So next question. Xcel recently admitted some cost overruns, undermet expectations, and other problems with their smart grid city project in Boulder. Has there been any collaboration with Xcel to help learn from their mistakes? Dennis or Mark?
Xcel's been getting a lot of press lately, as I think you probably all know. Their project cost more than they expected. They're trying to deal with the question, who's going to pay for this thing, and so on and so forth. If you'll think back to when they first rolled out their project, it was intended to be pretty much an experiment. It was driven by, in my view, a lot of what was available in the marketplace, what kind of arrangements could they make with different vendors, so on and so forth. And it strikes me to a large degree like our RDSI project that I talked about earlier. It was an experiment. It was meant to be a demonstration. It was meant to learn things. And different folks will have different perspectives on the success or failure of that. And that's really, that's not for me to judge. That's not what we're doing in Fort Collins. We're implementing a project. We have a detailed project plan. We have a detailed project budget. We talked about some of the deliverables we have to DOE. Not only do we have the most important audience in front of us, our owners, the citizens of Fort Collins. In addition to that, we have the Department of Energy peering over our shoulder, watching every step we make, concerned with our project execution plans, concerned with our cyber applications, so on and so forth. Our project is an implementation project. 3 years from now, we're going to have this project in place. We know what we plan to do. We know how we plan to do it. It's a very different project than what was done in Boulder.
That really has to do with kind of the approval process and moving this project forward. One here, I think, written well. This is being done without the express approval of the citizens' customers. What is your legal authority to do this? And has it been debated and approved by City Council, and when? And I think those are valid questions. The debate process with Council really was through the funding and budget processes. In order for utilities to, the city to issue the debt that went associated with that, was the time when that came before and was discussed at the Council level. And in terms of structure, just real briefly, it was touched on, I think, by Mark as us as a public utility. Essentially, our City Council is our board of directors. We are not formally regulated at the state level by the Public Utility Commission, and that's a very different situation than you might have with Xcel Energy. So we have quite a few municipal utilities in Colorado. Loveland and Longmont, Estes Park are kind of our sister cities with Platte River. Colorado Springs is another pretty large municipal utility. So in terms of that piece, I think the budgeting and the council processes is where that would happen. A couple of questions related to money and budget and things like that. So let's take care of those. It says, if you can just buy a universal remote at Radio Shack, why are we spending $20 million on smart grid in a city that is on track to close a swimming pool and cut hours at a senior center? And then related, how much ERA dollars did Fort Collins utilities receive, 15 million or 20 million? The dollars associated with it, Dennis put up there. So it was 15.4 million was the ERA funding for this project, matched essentially by issued debt and bonds. The city did receive some additional ERA funds for different projects. There was something called the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. There was a formula allocation. There have been a few other much smaller competitive grants that the city has been awarded, mostly through the Governor's Energy Office processes. So they've provided that piece. And in terms of the difference between what's going on at some of the other city facilities is really a distinction between the general fund, which is sales tax funded, and utility projects, which is known as an enterprise fund. So our funding comes from our ratepayers rather than from the sales tax process. A couple questions related to pricing and rates again. So Gary, maybe this one will end up in your court, but how do you anticipate aligning your advanced billing capabilities with the rate structure of wholesale power from Platte River Power Authority? And secondly, this morning, earlier, we had the question of will this lead to essentially a time of use type of rate, for example, paying more for usage on a hot summer afternoon. So can you talk about wholesale, retail, and that dynamic a little bit, Gary?
Historically, we've had a policy of, as much as possible, passing our wholesale rates through to our customers. So we're able to do this on the large commercial scale with advanced metering that we have. So, for instance, that coincident peak price that I was talking about earlier is a direct pass-through. That's how Fort Collins Utilities is charged, with a coincident peak price, and we pass that through to our large commercial customers. So they're very motivated to reduce that price, reduce that coincident peak. And then we pass the energy rate through as well. Then there's another piece in there that covers our distribution and facilities costs. So the rate that if you're a large or any customer, the portion of your bill that you pay that goes to Fort Collins Utilities is relatively small. Most of it is a pass-through from Platte River. Platte River's board is under discussion right now about a different rate structure, and that's why I threw that out there. There's discussion of a time of use rate, but it's not written in stone by any means. The discussion is, I'd say it's right in the middle. It's just in process, so we don't really know what that's going to look like. But it's likely within a few years going to look like some kind of different rate structure, maybe possibly with some more emphasis on energy than on demand, but we'll have to see how that all plays out. So what that means for you when our wholesale rate changes, likely that our retail rate is going to change as well to mimic that rate.
I mean, again, coming back to the foundational aspect, if we have the system we have now, Platte River could change their rate, and for various reasons they may want to do that because of their own dynamics going on at that level. We wouldn't have the tools to help try to manage that transition from the wholesale to the retail. With the AMI project, we will have the ability to map one to the other and allocate the rate structure in an appropriate fashion. I'll probably need some help with this one from somebody that's been at utilities longer than I have, but how does the smart grid compare in scale and cost with the distribution undergrounding project of the last 30 years? There seems like some analogies in terms of far-reaching, proactive, and long-term planning. Certainly in terms of the decision to move with an underground system, all new construction was done underground at that point, but there was a long process to take the early overhead system and put that underground. And I know there's a lot more digging involved. So, yes.
I think the first underground distribution system we put in was what's called the Mance Edition, and it's immediately to the north of Moby Gym. That was put in, I think, in 1945. In 1967, the City Council made a resolution that all new electric construction would be underground. Then in the mid-'80s, I think it was, we had probably 80% of the town was underground, just the nature of how we grew during that time frame. And then the decision was made by City Council that we should go back and retroactively bury the overhead system that existed at the time. And that project took us, I think in total 20 to 30 years. It cost us approximately $1 million a year. And at this point in time, we have 99+% of the system is underground. The challenge we have is that when we do annexations and we annex REA area, for example, out on the south side of town, typically we'll have overhead, and then that needs to be converted. So we've had a long commitment as a community to an underground distribution system, and trying to tell the exact cost of that. A lot of the cost has been borne by development since the standard was created in 1967 that all new development would be underground. The developer of a project absorbed that cost to put in the electric system. The retrofit program we undertook, as I mentioned, cost about $1 million a year. That was like a 20 or 30-year project. Say it was a 30-year project, it was around $30 million of utility investment into that. About the same size as this project, dollar-wise. Those are dollars from the 80s. I'm not going to say that those dollars have the same value, but in terms of raw numbers, it's a similar magnitude. The utility staff, in terms of raw dollars for a project, this is the biggest dollar project we've done. It's a major project for us. We take it very seriously.
We've got a couple questions here around tenants, landlords, multifamily housing. So I'm going to try to answer both here. So first is, if tenants originate a repair and charges are put on a meter billing, would the landlord be required to continue paying if the bill improvements are not completely paid off by the tenant? I think that's kind of a separate issue from what we're talking about today with the smart meter piece. We currently don't have any on-bill financing type of mechanisms. That may be something we'd look at for different reasons, and that's the time when we would be sorting out these types of issues. But it's not specifically part of an advanced metering kind of question. But second one kind of is asking how we are, as the utilities, are working with off-campus multifamily housing, and what would motivate a landlord or tenant to participate. Certainly in this foundational piece we keep coming back to, the cycle of moving in and move out with our campus community has an enormous impact on a seasonal basis on how we do business, that business processes piece. I see Craig back there. He pulled up some numbers recently that was trying to map what that difference looks like. And I think it was from about the end of July through maybe early September. The call volume we get, the turn on, turns off from moving in and moving out, increases by 900% during that period. And this will actually give us many more tools to be able to do that in a more timely fashion, in a more effective and more accurate way than we do right now. And we should see some substantial benefits with that. So those initial benefits come to us and sort of how we can manage that load. I think what would motivate the landlord or tenant to participate is going to be on those future pieces that get plugged in. They will have the same access to web portals or other devices as they choose to participate. A couple questions again around participant things. So Gary, maybe we'll put this one your way again. So again, specifically what real-time data might a customer receive, and how would that happen? And secondly, what are some other options that participants could do instead of just turning things off to limit their demand?
Basically, some of the ways that I described with the web portal, there would be lots of different flavors of data that you would get there. So you might want to look at just a monthly kilowatt hour. You know, right now you get a bill, you see how many kilowatt hours you use for the month. So that's the largest scale level. But with this, you'll be able to tunnel down into at least 15-minute data on your usage, which is, you know, beyond that, that's probably more information that you need. Unless you have an in-home display like I showed, and you're able to see real-time data on that display and actually see your home respond to different things coming on and off. As far as just turning things off, is there more to do than just turning things off? There are sort of integration issues, I guess is the way I think of it. And it was touched on earlier, but basically you have this network, you have loads, you have your dryer and your stove and lights and different things in your home, your electric vehicle that you're going to be charging, and you have possibly a photovoltaic system on your home. Maybe you're buying wind power, and you've got to feed into if the wind's blowing at Medicine Bow right now and there's power being generated. So you may want to manage your loads based on that. But essentially it's going to be controlling things based on it's going to be turning things off essentially and turning things on based on when generation is available if you want to make those decisions. So you may be making those decisions based on price or generation resources or things like that. Hope that answered that question.
I would like to add something to what Gary was saying, and this is not going to be something that will be available in the short timeline, but maybe thinking into 5+ years or maybe 10 years out, there is going to be the option of actually shifting load and storing energy. That was one of the things I mentioned before. Gary briefly mentioned, for instance, heat storage and cool storage with the iceberg units, the ice unit as rooftop units, having some sort of heating storage, those brick in a box. So it's not about turning off systems, it's about also being capable of shifting and storing when energy is cheap to be used when energy is more expensive.
Remember, the ideal utility customer, which none of us is one that just uses the same amount of energy all the time, because then we could build a power plant or a resource and just provide that. But the reality is that dynamic structure. So it's kind of moving around supplies, demands, as well as the time of use that is really going to make the most impact. And so could I briefly describe the consumer education plan for the AMI installation process? Part of that is here today. So this Smart Meter Fort Collins is going to be the name of our project, and you will be seeing more and more information in a variety of venues to get information out and the word out. That may be through some of our traditional materials like bill inserts and information. Typically we'll have descriptions of ongoing projects at the city, things like that. And we'll be talking about this a lot because it's going to be an enormous and ongoing project, both from the practical point of view of people walking around in yards and taking out old meters and putting new ones on and managing that process, as well as what it means both in the short run, which is fairly limited, as we've tried to emphasize today, to the long run, where it could have enormous impacts. And so we'll be continuing to try to do that. I welcome any additional feedback you have for us on how we can best continue this discussion and this outreach effort with the community, and thank you very much for attending.